This week's Shed Science is going to be a bit different. As you've noticed, I'm not in the shed, but as GM is going to be in the news a lot in the next week, I want to talk about what it is and what the science is behind it. A technique exists that allows us to transfer one or a few genes from one plant, such as short stems, and transfer it to a closely related, usually crop plant, such as wheat, which allows us to get short-stemmed wheat, a really desirable thing. But this isn't actually GM, this is selective breeding and has been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. The problem with this is that it requires the short stem gene, firstly to exist in nature, but you have to be able to find it in a species that you can breed with your crop plant, the wheat. If the short-stemmed gene had been found in, say, an oak tree, you wouldn't be able to get the oak tree and the wheat to breed, so you wouldn't be able to introduce this gene by selective breeding. And that's where GM comes in. All GM, or genetic modification, is doing exactly the same thing. But the best thing about GM is that there are far fewer restrictions on who can transfer to whom. In the next few days, if you haven't already heard about it, the Rothamsted wheat trial will be in the news. Rothamsted is a farm where scientists can research GM and find out how it works. They've looked at wheat, the major crop plant in the UK, and seen that it gets attacked by aphids. These are the small green bugs that effectively stick a straw, if you like, into the plant and then suck it dry. So this reduces the yield of wheat that we can produce, which is a bad thing. So we want to get rid of the aphids. We can do that in a couple of ways. We can spray the entire field with pesticides. Most of these pesticides aren't selective, so you're killing butterflies, ladybirds, bees, any insect. The second thing that the Rothamsted scientists have looked at, and they have done for the past 30 years, are using pheromones. These are smells that insects use to communicate with each other. And the scientists have found a smell that aphids give off when they're being attacked. So when the aphids smell this, they think, there's a big scary attacking monster coming, and they will run away. It's a bit like if someone was to fart in a room, no one would want to go near that place, so everyone walks away from the offending smell, and that way you can move the aphids from one place to another. So they've tried taking this pheromone and spraying it over the field as an essential oil, but the way that we smell is that the chemicals that produce the smell evaporate and go into our nose as a gas. And this means that if it's to work, this chemical is evaporating. It's being lost from the plant, so you've got to constantly reapply it and reapply it. Isn't feasible, costs a lot of money. So can we get the plants to make this smell themselves so that they can constantly be emitting it? And the scientists say, we don't know if it'll work. We're going to test it. And what they've done is they've taken the gene that makes the chemical, beta-farnesene, and stuck it into the wheat. They've tried it in the lab, so what they really need to do is test it in the field, and that's what they're doing. And that's what the massive controversy and planned protests are about. So on Sunday, a group of anti-GM protesters are going to invade the Rothamsted site and firstly chat to the scientists about what it is that they're doing, what their problems are with what the scientists are doing. And actually the scientists have been really welcome to this. They've posted videos, they've put a massive place on their website where you can ask them questions if you don't understand the science behind it, and I really recommend you go and have a look at that. The other side to the GM protest is that there's going to be a decontamination, which is another word for they're going to run in hazard suits and rip up the plants and destroy 7 years of research. I thought I'd have a look at some of the arguments that are generally thrown at GM, in particular in this GM wheat trial. Some people have said that it's dangerous to eat DNA. We're introducing DNA into our wheat that shouldn't be there. This can't be good for our health. DNA isn't everything that we eat. Anything living has DNA in it. There's a great video here where you can extract your own DNA from strawberries. If you see the amount of DNA that you can get out of one strawberry, you will realise that each time you eat a strawberry, you are eating grams of DNA. I say grams as if it's a big thing. It is a big thing. If you're still worried about the human health benefits of eating GM food, then if you live in America, and my stats tell me that 1/4 of you do, you have been eating GM food for the past 10 years of your life, whether you like it or not. And so far there has been absolutely no evidence to say that eating GM food has done anything bad for anyone's health. The second argument against the wheat trial at Rothamsted is that the protesters are saying that the pollen from the wheat, which will also contain this pheromone gene, will spread into the environment and contaminate the entire environment and is bad. 90% of wheat is self-fertilised, so the pollen starts at the top of the plant, it falls down because it's really heavy, fertilising itself on the way down, and sits on the floor, too heavy for the wind to pick up. Moreover, the scientists have planted a mixture of barley and normal non-GM wheat around the outside of their GM wheat trial, which means that if the pollen was to fall, it's trapped by this other wheat, so it really can't spread. And if you are worried about it spreading, walking through it, getting the pollen on your clothes, and then walking off to a completely different part of the countryside, taking the pollen with you, probably isn't the best strategy to try and keep the pollen contained, maybe. The last scientific point that the protesters are using is that we shouldn't be looking at GM because GM's dangerous. We haven't done enough research on GM to know that it's safe. So why are you stopping the GM research? So those are pretty much all the scientific arguments against GM, and it's fair to say that science says that GM is fine, or at least that we should do some more research on it, which is what the Rothamsted scientists are trying to do. So now onto the ethical arguments, and here maybe the protesters have a point. One of the reasons that GM has got a bad press is because of the way that businesses and large companies have used GM crops and GM seeds, especially in poorer countries. Making a GM crop requires a hell of a lot of money. So these big companies have spent a lot of money in research and development in making their GM crops, and for better or for worse, they want to hold on to those intellectual property rights. So what they do is they make their seed infertile. This means that the farmers have to buy seed year upon year from these big companies, which makes the companies money and makes the farmers poor and is completely unsustainable, and I agree with anyone who says that the use of GM crops in this way is bad. The Rothamsted wheat research is firstly funded by the UK government, and secondly, Rothamsted is actually a registered charity. They are not making money from their GM trial, and they have already said that any intellectual property rights are gone. Anyone can have access to this information. There are no patents. This means that there are going to be no infertile seeds. No one can make money from the research that they are doing, and it's really important that we separate the GM research and the GM science, like the stuff that's being done from Rothamsted, from big companies using modern technology in a bad way. The second ethical argument is that we shouldn't be playing God with our food or with nature. But if you remember what I told you about selective breeding at the beginning of this video, you can see that it's exactly the same. We're just doing it on a slightly bigger scale. If you really want to see how far selective breeding can go, Google for Belgian blue bull. Look at the pictures, it looks horrible, but that is not GM, that is selective breeding. So if you want to argue that we're playing God with our food, then yes we are. And you should therefore be lobbying farming in its entirety. We have 10 billion mouths to feed. We're currently on 7 billion, and at the moment 1 billion people go to bed hungry. But when we reach 10 billion people on the planet, we need to find a way of making more food, and this involves looking at GM as an option. If we do the research on the GM and we find that it's not viable, that it doesn't work, it costs too much money, it's bad for our health, we won't use it, but we've got to know what it can do for us, what its potential is, before we can just rule it out. And so the protests are planned to be this Sunday at Rothamsted. Rothamsted have published it all on their website, and I really urge you to have a look. I'd love to have a discussion about what you think as well in the comments below, because GM really divides people, and I don't know whether that's because they know the science and they don't like it, or whether they just don't know the science and therefore are scared of it, which is, to be honest, reasonable if you're not sure of something. This has been a bit different to my normal videos. I normally plan it out a bit more. My next video is going to be on altruism. I'm going to be getting myself a green beard to wear for that video. If you liked more videos from me, then you can subscribe. Please let me know what you think in the comments below or on Twitter, and keep smiling.